You've lost someone you love, and you're getting hit from every direction: funeral costs, bills you didn't expect, and people telling you what you can or can't do while you're still trying to breathe. And in Indiana, one of the fastest ways families get hurt a second time is waiting too long, trusting the wrong person's advice, or signing something before they understand what a wrongful death claim actually covers. I'm Chad Romey, and this is Chris Blackburn, and we're personal injury attorneys here in Indiana. And we help families navigate these cases when they have no energy left to fight a system that's already moving against them. In the next few minutes, we're going to explain how wrongful death lawsuits work in Indiana, who's legally allowed to bring the case, what deadlines can shut it down, and what damages may be available, so that you can stop guessing and start making decisions from a place of clarity. Because the goal isn't to be litigious. The goal is making sure your family isn't pressured into a quick, cheap resolution that doesn't even come close to accounting for what this loss has actually done to your life. So, Chris, start right from the top. Who can bring or file wrongful death lawsuits in Indiana?
Well, the first thing that has to happen is there needs to be a legal entity that needs to be created in order to pursue the claim. That's called an estate. And when you open an estate, you need a personal representative. So that's someone that's going to be appointed to bring the claim on behalf of the estate. And we call that, well, we already said that,
Personal representative.
the personal representative. In wrongful death, more often than not, it's usually the spouse, the surviving spouse. It can be a child, as long as the child's competent enough. Or sometimes there could be challenges to that. It could be a parent.
And by child, you mean somebody over the age of 18, but
Yes.
the child of the deceased.
Yeah. More often than not, it's usually a family member. Didn't you have a unique case, though, where there was a case that turned into a wrongful death, but you couldn't find anyone to pursue the claim on behalf of the estate?
Yeah, somebody had fallen and gotten hurt really, really bad. Worst fall down case ever had. And she ended up dying a year later after the accident. And she didn't probably have any family. And so nobody was interested in pursuing the claim on her behalf. Now, could we have found somebody who wasn't related to step in and pursue the claim? Probably. But to what end? There was nobody around to benefit, if you will, from any recovery. And it was a tough case, but that was a very unique situation. And so sometimes when we're looking to see who can pursue the claim on behalf of the estate, sometimes it's just a matter of who starts the process.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a race to the courthouse. If you have kind of competing interests, one child wants to pursue the claim or a different child wants to pursue the claim on behalf of their deceased parent, who hires the lawyers fastest and then gets to the courthouse to say, hey, I'm going to be the personal representative to pursue this.
Yeah, and you never like to have these cases where someone passes away as a result of someone else's negligence, especially minors. I mean, they're extremely sad. It's kind of unique in a child wrongful death. An estate isn't going to be open. The parents one of the parents or both parents will actually handle that claim. Generally, what is a wrongful death?
Right. So a wrongful death claim is when obviously somebody dies as the result of the negligence of somebody else. And many times we're looking at, in our practice, we're looking at car accidents. Okay. And somebody is tragically hurt in the accident. They might die at the scene or they might die days later as a result. But as long as the death is the reasonable conclusion to what happened from the negligent act, then that would be considered a wrongful death. Sometimes you have a discussion of, did that harm cause that end result of the death? And that's a dispute, but you just have to be able to connect the dots through expert testimony, through what the doctors are saying, which then leads to the question of what damages can be recovered. And by damages, we're talking about what can you pursue in a lawsuit? What's the compensation, if you will? And it's kind of awkward to talk about, hey, what's all that worth? But ultimately, it's the only thing the insurance company involved can compensate you with. They can't turn back time, unfortunately. So what kind of damages do we look at in a wrongful death?
Pretty similar to personal injury. There are going to be some differences there. You can recover medical expenses, funeral and burial expenses as well. So if the injured person is hurt, transferred to the hospital, or was treated in the hospital for a number of days, those are bills that are going to be compensable. Lost wages and loss of earnings capacity. This is going to be usually one of the biggest components of a wrongful death. So depending on the type of employment that the plaintiff had, that you can, and the age, that's going to be something that you can forecast out. Someone who's making a lot of money compared to someone who's making minimum wage, and they're young or old, you can get some really large numbers with that.
And there's also, and we've kind of addressed this, and we'll get into the rest of these damages here. There are three different types of wrongful death claims in Indiana. We have just the general wrongful death statute. We have the adult wrongful death statute, and then the child wrongful death statute, or at least the different rules for. So general wrongful death is you have a wife and kids. So if you died, it would come under the general wrongful death. Okay. If somebody who doesn't have a spouse, doesn't have any dependents, dies, then that's going to be adult wrongful death. And then the child wrongful death is somebody who's under the age of 18 or up to a certain age after they turn 18, as long as they meet certain requirements, like maybe they're still living with their parents or they're in post-secondary education or some sort of apprenticeship or training program. Again, you can't be 40 and doing that, but I think 23 or 25, somewhere, I think it is 23, that still qualifies. So the damages that you can pursue in those three different types are different. And we're not going to break it all down, but it's just something you need to realize that depending upon who dies, what you can recover does change.
So yeah, and there's not that many situations where there's caps, but certainly in Indiana there is a cap component where if someone passes away without any dependents and they're not married, then Indiana's going to cap that at 300,000.
300,000 on top of like medical bills. So what other types of damages are we looking at other than lost earnings or medical expenses or funeral expenses in a wrongful death claim?
Transfees and cost.
Yeah. So that is a component, not in every type of wrongful death, but you can recover some of what you're going to be paying your attorney from the other side. Loss of love and companionship. And so obviously when somebody close to you dies, it's not just a matter of, oh, what did that cost me financially? Well, now I'm out a life partner, or now I'm out a child. And so again, depending upon the type of claim you have, that is a component of it, also with the cap in some instances. So what's the deadline though? So obviously most people, after something like this hits them, they're not immediately thinking, what are my legal deadlines? What do I have to do to sue somebody? No, you're grieving. You're like readjusting your entire life. So what are the deadlines we're looking at here?
2 years from the date of death.
2 years from the date of death that the claim has to be resolved, or got to file the lawsuit.
Got to file the lawsuit.
All right. There's one deadline which is not specific to wrongful deaths, but it's something you need to know. If the negligent party, the at-fault party, is a governmental entity, so if you get hit by a police car, there's an additional deadline in there. You typically look at it as 6 months after the accident. You have to file what's called a notice of a tort claim. Basically, you have to put that governmental entity on notice that you're coming after them. And then that gets it into a whole nother area of their caps there as well. You can only recover so much. So within that deadline, there's some steps you have to go through, and some of them need to happen pretty quickly. Others can wait. So if you're the one that's wanting to pursue the claim, then you have to typically open up an estate and get a personal representative set up. You don't have to use a lawyer for that. It's going to be a lot easier if you do. So at least talk to one about what you need to do to properly make that happen. ChatGPT is not the way to draft estate stuff at all. There's a lot of magic language that needs to happen with estate practice, and you need to make sure that that's all that magic language or the right stuff is in there. But you also want to start gathering any evidence that you can. Okay, so in order to be able to show what you lost, you don't just get to say I lost it. You have to show that you lost it. So gather police reports. We're looking at medical records and billing. If you know if witness statements, sometimes with these accidents, there's lots of witnesses that are unknown. And so we found witnesses that didn't end up on the police report on Facebook before, just because they had posted about the incident. So try to gather that stuff. And then sometimes these things can be settled without filing a lawsuit, but lots of times you're going to have to file a lawsuit, especially the more complex the case is. To talk to an attorney sooner rather than later. The end step is you're either going to settle your case through negotiations, or you're going to have to put this all the way through a jury trial. A lot to think about when you're like reeling from the loss of a loved one. So sooner rather than later, talk to a lawyer, see if you have a case, see what they can do for you, or if they can just direct you in the right way.
Yeah, when you're talking about filing a lawsuit, generally those are going to take a year or 2 years before you can even get to a settlement conference. Most of the counties here in Indiana, the judges are going to require a settlement conference known as a mediation before they'll give a trial date. So it can be a very time-consuming aspect. A lot of the cases that we get earlier on, we can help and navigate. We can steer the right direction. We can build the file, and it allows us to litigate the case a lot quicker, more efficiently, where if a client or potential client comes to us on the eve of the statute and then we have to file a lawsuit, that's just going to be more time for the individual because we're building the file and litigating at the same time.
And a lot of the evidence is gone at that point.
Oh, yeah.
When we get involved early, we send out letters to the at-fault party saying, hey, preserve your evidence, preserve that vehicle. Don't let it get crushed. We want to be able to get some data out of that vehicle. So sooner rather than later, it doesn't make you a bad person for talking to a lawyer. You're just trying to level the playing field because you're going to be working or operating against an insurance company that does this thousands and thousands of times a year. And fortunately for you, or hopefully for you, you've never done it before, and hopefully we'll never do it again. So that's why talking to an experienced wrongful death lawyer does matter. Not just any lawyer. These are complex cases and you need to be jumping through all the right hoops. So if you got a lawyer who does, gosh, well, they wrote my will, so they must be able to handle wrongful death. That's not necessarily the case. They might, but talk to somebody who's handled these many, many times. So we just walked you through everything you need to know about understanding wrongful death lawsuits in Indiana. Who can file? What counts as a wrongful death? What damages can you seek as a result of a wrongful death? How long you have and what the process looks like in real life. Now you're already ahead of most people facing this heartbreaking situation. But there's something else you need to know. The types of damages that you can pursue during a personal injury claim are just as important to understand, and they're not always obvious. That's exactly what we're going to cover in our next video. 4 types of damages that you can pursue during an injury claim. If you want to make sure you and your family are fully protected and not leaving money on the table, you need to watch that next one. So click over to 4 types of damages you can pursue during an injury claim now. I promise it's a must watch if you care about protecting your rights after a loss. Thank you.